Hey, sorry, John. I don't know. It's not letting me. There we go. Think I got you, bud. Waiting for you. Yeah, we
Hey,
got it.
brother, we got it,
There's some
man.
technical
Y-
difficulties there, but
Yeah,
I think I
you
got
got this old man in there finally, brother.
it. Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Well, it's good to see you, man. I miss you, bro.
Yeah, I
It's
miss
been a
you too,
while.
man. I mean, we were gonna have a couple more fishing trips, right? And
We
everything
really
kind of got
were.
axed. I know, dude.
Oh, they got axed. I think we're
Yeah,
all pretty sad right now about it.
I think so, man. It's been a tough time, right? To kind of be through, the virus and but the shutdown has been tough. I mean, as you and I both know, being on the rivers like our whole existence,
Oh
so.
yeah,
Yeah, and all it's even difficult to get on the river because so many places are, so many launches are shut down and all the access points. Yeah, I'm even having a hard time getting out to snorkel, but that's kind of basically what I've been doing to kill
that's fun.
time. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's a good way to enjoy it out there. Well,
Absolutely.
I kind of want to just introduce you to everybody who doesn't already know you. So you're the Steelhead Science Director for TU, and
Yeah, let me get this straight here. There we
you
go.
worked
Yep,
on the there you go,
there we are.
and you worked on this Elwha project for a little while, and I just wanted to ask you right away, like, how does it feel to be a part of something that has obviously shown so much success, and one of the first dam removal projects of its kind like this? How does it feel, man?
Well, I feel really lucky. So it's interesting for me because I lived in Forks for about 9 years, right? And then I went back to grad school to Oregon State University. And when I finished grad school, which I tried to do in as short a time as possible because Corvallis is a decent town, but it's not the Olympic Peninsula, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to rural Washington, and a job popped up, right, with a friend of mine that worked at NIMS. And I was like, okay, I guess I could live near the Elwha and do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a change in perception of the Elwha, right? Because when I used to come from Forks to Port Angeles to get groceries or see friends, it was like, it's the Elwha. It's got two dams on it, right? I'm not
Yeah.
going to spend any time in the lower 5 miles fishing the Elwha for, the
Yeah.
fish that are down there. And it's just trout above and some bull trout. So it wasn't that
Yeah.
important to me, right? It was
Yeah.
just on the back burner. Um, but in 2009, I took the job with NIMS to help them do research on the Elwha. And I started working really close with the lower Elwha Clallam tribe in the national park. And, the first 2 years, it was just me below the dam, just kind of snorkeling a lot below the dam, the lowermost dam, the Elwha Dam, to see what we had in the lower 5 miles. That was a lot of fun. And then, of course, as soon as the dam started to come out, I was tasked. I got a turbidity meter. So the meter was like a water temperature meter. And I would basically just go around to 10 or 15 spots every day measuring turbidity to see how much the river had changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
After dam removal. And I want to give folks a sense of just how different a dam removal project is from a flood, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
we went through a big flood in the L, 20,000 CFS,
Uh-oh.
which is pretty big for the Elwha. Of course, that's nothing for the Hoe or something. And
No.
the turbidity peaked at like 600 NTUs, and NTUs are just a measurement. Like it's like
Yeah.
Fahrenheit or Celsius. So the higher it is, the more turbid, the lower, the less. So
Yeah.
at a big flood, it peaked at 600 NTUs. The first wave of sediment that made its way through the Elwha, we got 4,000 NTUs on the.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was that dramatic. It
Yeah.
was Mount St. Helens. It was the water was so thick with sediment that you smelled the dirt like you're working in your garden on one of those musty
Yeah.
mornings, you just
Yeah.
smelled. The thing was just filled with dirt. So it's a little bit of a long story to get to the point where I can tell you that over the last 10 years of working on this dam project, I have never seen scientists work together so well and so selflessly towards one goal of better understanding the whole ecosystem. And that's the thing is I study fish and I mostly study steelhead, right? Or
Yeah.
salmonids, but there's people in here who are geomorphologists, right? Who are geologists, that are studying basically all the physical stuff, right? Just the
Yeah.
river and its habitat and the rocks and gravel. And then we got people studying macroinvertebrates, we got people studying birds and mammals, and we got people studying vegetation. And so I'm one little part, but it's an awesome feeling to be in a place where you have these scientists that are answering questions that you're interested in. and they're actually, you have people to do it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be
You're
like
able
us
to
working.
compare that.
Yeah. So that
It's so
was,
cool.
you feel like, I mean, you're a part of a big group and you're all seeing cool things, and it's fun to shoot out an email during those times. Like I remember the first day that Ray Moses and I, Ray works for Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, and he's a native Nez Perce, and
Yeah.
he's been out here for, I don't know, 15 years. And so we went up, we had moved a bunch of steelhead. So during the initial dam removal process, when dams were being removed, we started moving adult coho up into some creeks into
Yeah.
the Elwha to jumpstart the process. A couple years later, we started to do the same thing with adult steelhead that we were capturing. So we would be down there, you know, and adult steelhead would swim into the hatcheries because it was a clear water source. We'd take the fish out, move them up above. And the first time we moved those fish, we had this really nice assemblage of females, but there were only a couple small males in there. And it took no longer, it was 2 days later that Ray and I went back up there to do a survey just to see what we saw. And there was this, because we Floyd tagged all the fish, and a Floyd tag's like a spaghetti tag, you know, it's about the size of a couple inches, right?
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So we color code those by the week that we release fish. We put 2 of them in their back. We're looking at this, at a couple of females that are starting to look like they want to spawn, and this huge male steelhead swims right up between them. That was probably 18 or 19 pounds. We had not moved any fish that large, for one.
Wow.
But 2 had no tags. And so we sat there together in this experience of, we're the first person to see a steelhead volitionally ascend that former Elwha Dam site. Yeah. And we got to watch that together, and to do it with a close friend, man, it was a good feeling. I can tell you, we immediately got on the horn and called our bosses and said, look what we found. We shot emails, and everybody's really excited. But during that initial time of this discovery, even though we as scientists in our little kind of small community were excited, you know, a lot of people in town publicly in Port Angeles, not a lot, but there were, you know, there's still a strong contingent of no dam removal people, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so the next fall, when we had Chinook that were starting to colonize up above on their own, there were articles in town with people, not articles in the newspaper, but comments in the newspaper saying that they thought these were just big rainbow trout that had been locked in above the lakes. And I'm like, they're 30 pound. 18, 19 pound whoppers. And so we started coming up with some jokes that these were like astronomous fish. They'd went to Mars and come back. You know, they had just had a much longer migration that took like a light year. So they were just returning. They'd went as smolts before the dams were built and came back when they were out. But it's been an awesome time, man. I feel really blessed, you know. I feel very lucky.
Dude, it's amazing. That story of the Elwha is so cool. And, you know, I grew up here. I was talking to Rob about it yesterday. It's just, I mean, to grow up here and hear all the stories of the largest Chinook in the world and all that kind of stuff, and just the allure of the Elwha. And in my entire lifetime, it's been like you said, you know, there's some up above there, and, you know, like, nothing going on as far as fishing goes. And like, we all steal it. We never really, and I think a lot of us wrote it off, you know.
Totally. I mean, it was
almost all anglers in the Pacific Northwest wrote it off, and it once was glorious. So with that said, you kind of touched on this when you were just talking there, but I wanted to ask you, you know, in the Elwha film, you called the Elwha a living laboratory. And I just wanted you to touch on that, what exactly you meant by that.
Sure. So, you know, by a living laboratory, I basically mean that what we're doing is we took 2 really huge actions, right? We removed dams, and then you get to see how an ecosystem responds. So in many ways, this is like an experiment. And it's really rare in nature for us to have such a really big action taken in one place. And then we get a chance where there's enough government funding to actually research it. So in that sense, the Elwha is a laboratory to me as a scientist, right? I get a chance not only to see how the river responds after dam removal physically, you know, how long does it take the sediment to transport through the system? And in that sense, you know, the geomorphologist, the hydrologist, the geologist doing all that work have now found that the Elwha is already at background levels of sediment, and that happened about 2 years ago. So what we're seeing in the Elwha now is basically this is the new normal, right?
Yeah.
When I'm out there in high waters, it doesn't look the turbidity is no worse than it was during those big flood events that we used to have, right? It's not in the thousands of NTUs. It's up there around 300 to 500 NTUs. So, and it runs really clear right now, right? I'm out, and I can see steelhead in the river now when I go out for a snorkel. So that's exciting. So, that's one of the components of the laboratory is how long does it take for the river to respond and kind of get back to normal. And we're not saying it's perfectly normal now, right? Lots of vegetation has to grow. The channels will still be mobile, but I also thought that this is a laboratory because from a fish perspective, we get an opportunity here to see what happens when you open up a bunch of new habitat that fish have not had access to for 100 years. And so
we get to see how they recolonize and how salmonids, that's like their thing. That's what's so amazing. I think a lot of people, I was growing up and the thought was that the salmon always goes to the exact same stream that it spawned in, never ever goes anywhere else. That same with steelhead. That's like the deal. And, it's just amazing. This is a real proof that, salmon and steelhead are going to recolonize this river, whether, they're there after the dam or not,
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people might not realize that the Elwha and the Hoh River both had big glacial dams on them. And both those rivers also experienced small glacial floods like the Missoula floods. So there's evidence that those glacial dams would then break, of course, right? And that would send a wall of water down. So these fish had to have repeatedly dealt with that type of glacial activity over the last several thousand years, right? And so, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by the resilience, but we should be because we've always had our foot on their throat, right? We've not given salmon a lot of time to really recover, but the opportunity just to track the fish and what they're doing, I can't tell you how much I've learned. And I want to give two examples of where I think we found some really cool stuff. And the first one is that when we started to get these fish into the upper river, we also had a bunch of brook trout that were in the upper Salduck, right? And those are not native to the system. They're from the East Coast, and they were planted there over, for a long period of time because we planted everything, right? I mean, we were like Johnny Appleseeds in the 50s and 30s and 60s. So these brook trout were in there. They were really common in off-channel habitats. And the brook trout, the biggest ones we would see would be 10, 11 inches, right? Very small brook trout. And so the concern, of course, was that those brook trout would begin hybridizing with bull trout. And we already had bull trout in the middle and upper Elwha. There was probably some hybridization going on. But that was a concern. And we're also concerned that, look, this is a native fish restoration project. Is there some way that brook trout could impede? And so Tom Quinn, who's a professor at UW, got a grad student out here. And for the life of me, I cannot remember her name right now. And she is on Instagram. And I feel like a complete jerk for not remembering. But, you go through a lot of folks out here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And she was out here working, and they did a study. They wanted to see what happens when you introduce brook trout and coho together. And this was funny. So brook trout, the little 10-inch female might have 100 eggs. She kicks out 100 eggs, right? That big coho has several thousand, 3,000 to 6,000. Emily, that is it. Emily. I just saw Silver Reel Studio. Emily Thornton was awesome. And so Emily did this work, and this was cool. So what you find, and this is what I started observing, is that those coho grow really fast, and they all spawn at the same time as brook trout, and they love to eat things. And so these little kind of nocturnal, they're brook trout, and they're kind of isolatory little fish. They're solitary, and the coho are like gregarious, and they're like, if we can't give you a hug, we're going to eat you. And so it's just, I mean, we started seeing this. I would see these little pods of zero age brook trout, and you would come back to that little pod every couple days, and there would be more and more gone until there's none left. And the coho were saying, they're just getting chunkier. And so it was really fun to see that native species, right, can take care of themselves at times. And that was a lot of fun. And I think the second thing that we saw that I think from an ecosystem level that was really cool was that when we first got salmon into creeks that had not had salmon for 100 years, like Little River and Indian Creek, the first year we had all the coho spawning in Chinook, no animals ate the carcasses. They just, The
Wow.
carcasses just remained there, right? It was strange.
Wow.
But the next year, about a third of the carcasses were being eaten. And the third year, we were lucky to have, 1% of any carcass left.
Do you
So,
think that some of those animals didn't even know they were there? Didn't
yes,
even know it
yeah,
was an option. And maybe there's some animals like raccoons and stuff like that, and minks and things like that like to eat that flesh. They've called that home now.
totally. That was,
Those fish have come back.
it
That is
was,
so cool, John.
so it's just like riding the backs of white lightning. They're riding the backs of salmon up the river, the bears, the cougars, whatever else. But there was another cool piece of research that came along with it out of the Smithsonian, which was done in concert with Kim Sager-Fradkin, who's a biologist of the Lower Elwha tribe, and she's a wildlife biologist. And they were looking at the dippers, the American water ozel,
I love
the
them.
little
Yep,
the little
American
bird.
water
Yeah,
weasel.
my favorite bird, man.
Love
They're
them too.
always so happy.
I
So
think
the
they're
water,
steelhead's best friend, man.
I think
everybody knows that.
I'm
Yeah.
with you on that. And
Yeah.
so it was cool that every time Ray Moses and I were doing the surveys, we would see a pair of dippers up Little River in about 3 miles. It's just one pair.
Yeah.
When we had all those salmon carcasses and weren't being eaten, there was still one pair, but those were flying around, and the dippers were just dropping eggs. There were so many eggs in the carcasses that they were just like, yeah, it was like little kids. It was like if you left your house, it's like if you just left your house to 5 dogs, all the toys go out in the yard and they're spread everywhere, and the dog doesn't care, right? It's like, and by the third year, there were like 6 pairs of dippers. And so the scientists started to look at the dippers, their productivity increased, their abundance increased, and they saw that these dippers had that marine-derived nutrient signature in them from the salmon. So it was 3 to 4 years. It's just amazing how important salmon are and the abundance of salmon, right? They need extra salmon. Extra salmon are not surplus. They're, that's nature's food source, right? I mean, it's just awesome.
Yeah, it really is. Let me get another question here for you that I think it's one that me and Shane were talking about, I think, more than everybody else. But you busted your mouth pretty good when you were snorkeling. Let's hear about this story. But
yeah, so
when you're snorkeling at Elwha, I don't know if everybody knows, but John spent a lot of time snorkeling in Elwha, looking at these steelhead that have recolonized it. So during this process, you smacked your mouth pretty good on a rock or something.
Dude,
hear about it.
Pretty good. So I've been snorkeling since I'm like 10 or 12, and I'm 48 now, which means I've been doing it a long time. And there's only, before the Elwha, before this summer, there was only one other time I'd hurt myself, and that was kind of slamming my chest into a rock once coming down some rapids and knocked the wind out of me. But every other time, you might hit a shin. You just learn over the years, right? Like how to avoid the bad stuff. But we'd hike, that 15 to 20 miles to get up to the Elwha camp that we were at. And then the next morning, Shane and I got up with Rob Massanis and Josh Deedy, and we hiked up about another 4 miles. And then we hiked a mile down into the river. We get to the head of the canyon. Yeah. And this is, the canyon of no return for us. Once you're in the thing, there's no getting out of it. Yeah. And the canyon itself is about 3 miles long. And so we're sitting there at the head of it, and Shane's like, here's a GoPro and here's a probe. And I've never really used a GoPro. I do a lot of underwater photography, but it's all with a big DSLR, a mirrorless, and a housing. So it's real bulky, right? You're carrying it with both hands. Yeah. You don't float down the river with it. So this thing, I'm floating down the river looking at the back of the camera, the GoPro, not paying attention. And within a few hundred yards, I just ran full smack down in a rapid into a rock in my mouth. And I felt it, right? You just immediately know, man, it felt like I'd just been in a fist fight, like I was 15 again, the fight just slammed me in the mouth. So I get up. Shane and Rob were still coming down to meet me, and I could taste the blood all over in my mouth. I tasted iron, and then I lifted it up and showed Shane. He's like, yeah, I can see your teeth. And so we'll post a picture that basically went like this. Yeah, and you're like, yeah, you've seen it. And for about half an hour, it was just blood pouring out the thing. And we sat there for about 10 minutes, and I'm like, what are we going to do, right? I mean, like, there's no way I'm hiking back out. Yeah, there's no way that I'm going to hike 4 miles. I'm like, screw this, we're going for it. And after a couple of hours, I just kind of stopped noticing, right? And then I got back. But yeah, it was, man, the blood, the mouthpiece of my snorkel, which is normally clear, is stained red. from
From
that
that,
day. Yeah, from that
mouth
day.
wounds bleed a lot, dude. I've
They
had my
bleed bad.
yeah, they absolutely can. So one of the coolest things about this whole Elwha deal is that all those rainbow trout were trapped for 100 years above the dam.
Yeah.
And I want you to just kind of explain to everybody the role that those rainbow trout played in
Sure.
bringing summer steelhead back.
Yeah, so an interesting hypothesis before the dams came out, and I think that a lot of us who study steelhead were thinking is that, look, rainbow trout never lose a population of rainbow trout never always will have some individuals that remain or retain the ability to go to the ocean and become a steelhead, right? To
Yeah.
become a smolt.
Yeah.
And so one of the first years that we were sampling adult winter run steelhead in the Elwha, we sent the genetics back to the lab at NIMS, and we got results back that indicated 2 of those 40 adults that we had collected had come from rainbow trout that were in the upper river.
Oh, wow.
So we think during high flood events that some steelhead smolts, probably other fish, were getting pushed over the dams because sometimes those dams would just get breached a bit in really high water, or they're just getting flushed out through the dam when they're spilling water trying to keep up. So that must be how we got those 2 fish.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of the summer runs, my hunch, of course, is that, look, rainbow trout and summer runs both usually have a distinct gene that was discovered by a fella named Mike Miller, who's a friend and a research scientist at UC Davis. And NIMS has a really good geneticist, Krista Nichols. And so Krista's been working on this with another geneticist from WSU named Alex Frake, and they've been looking at this, and their data is suggesting so far that it looks like the steelhead that we're seeing that are summer runs are coming from rainbow trout that were locked above the dams. Now, the only caution I hedge is that we're not done looking at all the samples, right? But that's what it looks like. So before the dams came out, there was a clear structure of rainbow trout above the dams and these steelhead genotypes below, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And now we're seeing a big mixture, right? So that rainbow trout genotype that's showing up is showing up in steelhead lower in the river.
Yeah.
And so definitely it would appear for sure that rainbow trout are contributing to the resurgence of the summer steelhead that we saw in there. And I just want to also give a shout out because I saw Catherine Sutton gave me a props and said hardcore. We had so many people up there. I want to give a shout to some of the people. Nick Chambers was up there with us doing great work. He's P&W at River Rat. We had Josh Deedy, and Josh did an amazing job up there as a volunteer with us. And then we had folks that have been working for a long time, like Catherine Sutton is a scientist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who now works with WDFW. She's from Port Angeles, and she has done far more backcountry work in the Elwha than I have. She's been up there leading crews to sample fish and do all that great work. And then there is Heidi Connor, and Heidi Connor works for the National Park. And Heidi has also been leading much of the backcountry work. In fact, I think Heidi was the first person to observe an adult summer steelhead above glinds underwater. So
wow.
I always want to give a shout out because, I love steelhead and they're my focus. And so sometimes I end up getting to talk about them maybe a little more than other people because I do have a really narrow research focus. But those people have all done such tremendous work. I mean, Sam Brinkman at the National Park, George Pess at NOAA, Mike McHenry at the Lower Elwha Tribe, Roger Peters at U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There's a huge group, right, that I stand on their shoulders. When I'm communicating to you folks today, I've only contributed to a small part of that. I literally stand on their shoulders. And yeah, Rob Masanis, I saw Masanis, my boss, so this was awesome. Rob was going through that day, and you've had him on. And he was like, yeah, John, I see your teeth in there. Masanis was hardcore too, because that day, you guys, to put it in perspective, it was raining and the water was about, I don't know, my guess is that water somewhere in the high 40s, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in a wetsuit and it's raining and it's, by the end of the day, you're cold, right?
Yeah.
A little bit. And Heidi and Catherine told me I'll be cold. And I always know that I get cold at the end of the day when you're going through that. But it was it was just, you just felt like you had given it your all, right?
Yeah.
Like going through that canyon made my day. And I'm going to say it's made my probably the next couple years of my life, right? I want to do it again, but it was such an awesome experience.
The Elwha is mighty, man.
It's
It's a really
mighty.
mighty river, and it's got a lot of cool canyons in it and box canyons. All of them. It's like when you're saying 4 miles hike out, but what was that 4 mile hike out like?
Yeah.
You know that spot. Could you even have got out of that spot if you wanted to? There's some
No.
places in rivers where you just go downstream, and that's all there is to it.
You know, brother, I mean, we're stuck in there. It was just, you're not getting out of those. And to put it in context, there's also the Grand Canyon, and that's considered too dangerous to survey. And we were going to try to snorkel it last year. Nobody's ever snorkeled the Grand Canyon. And Shane and Nick and I were going to go in there and try it. But the flows came up. We got a huge rainstorm. So on the last day of our survey, the rivers blew out completely. So we got really lucky. But next year, we're going to try and hit Grand Canyon and snorkel it because, it's such a big canyon. It likely has steelhead in it.
Yeah.
But we need to know something about that. I don't think we'll be able to survey Grand Canyon every year.
Yeah.
But, we're both similar, right? You got to explore. The adventure is half the fun. Yeah.
You gotta bend the rules a little bit when it comes to your own safety.
Absolutely. You risk a little bit more. What's around the next bend, man? Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Well, I think this brings me to a good point. We've had a lot of questions. You're talking about there's so many players in this Elwha Dam removal story, and one of them was the Elwha tribe. And I know we've had a lot of questions. People are concerned about the steelhead hatchery that might be on the Elwha or already is. Could you shed a little light on that and maybe answer a couple of questions? Yeah.
So for those folks who aren't aware, the little bit of history is that the Elwha dams were scheduled to come out, of course, right? And there was a hatchery on the Elwha prior to that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has always run that rears Chinook salmon.
Yes.
And back in the 80s and stuff, they were also rearing, steelhead on occasion and some other fish. But the tribe had a small hatchery that reared coho salmon.
Yeah.
So the coho and the Chinook that existed in the lower 5 miles were all there because of the hatchery, right? It was just such a small amount of habitat. They were never going to be able to support large populations of salmon. So once the dam came out, or once the dam was planned to come out, the tribe got some money for a new upscaled hatchery. The plans were to rear and release coho and winter steelhead. Mm-hmm. And the winter steelhead were collected from juvenile wild steelhead in the Elwha and then reared in captive brood. So they're wild fish from the system. And the Chinook and the coho programs were just going to kind of stay the same. Yeah. And so that was controversial, right? There was a lawsuit over that. The tribe and NIMS ended up on the winning end of that lawsuit. And I guess that I can understand both sides. And I want to provide people, I think, the perspective that they might not hear as a sports person or an angler, or maybe even somebody who just loves rivers, which is that my personal preference, of course, would be to see a river like this recolonized naturally, because that gives me, as a scientist, the clearest evidence possible for what works. Yeah, right? I mean, we would know, and we would know how long it takes. But at the same time, the tribe literally has, most of the tribes in Western Washington have 1 or 2 rivers that are considered their usual and accustomed area that they were provided treaty rights to fish and hunt in. Mm-hmm. So the Elwha tribe, of course, has the Elwha River, right? Yeah. And so they literally have one river. They've waited 100 years for the dams to come out. They've been fighting it, for a really long period of time. And the tribe decided, along with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, that they thought that releases of winter steelhead, coho, and Chinook salmon would help jumpstart the recolonization process. Yeah. And I've come to support that because I have a lot of friends on both sides of the camp, but my perspective has been that I don't have one watershed. I can go fish the Hoe, I can go fish the Salduck, I can go fish the Queets, right? If the Elwha isn't up to providing fish for me, I can go somewhere else, but the tribe can't. And I also think that you're stuck with 5 miles of river, that it was probably going to take quite a long time for salmon to recolonize everything naturally on their own. You're probably then talking about a 15 to 20 year process, right? Yeah. And we're naturally human beings. It's really hard to wait that long when you've already had a dam in your system for 100 years. So I support the tribe. I think that they probably took some shots, and somebody just raised a great question, which is that, look, the sediment loads that were coming out of the system were so high that they were expected to kill most of the fish below the dams. Of
Yeah.
course, we still had fish above the dams, rainbow trout and bull trout that were above the dams.
Yeah.
But it killed 95% to 99% of the fish. It killed 95% of the macroinvertebrates. So you basically had fish in a bank account here that were allowed to persist during the period and then help recolonize. And our research together has shown that, yes, the coho hatchery program has increased recolonization. It helped kind of speed up the process.
Mm-hmm.
We've got good work on that. And the Chinook program was struggling to produce natural fish for about the first 6 to 7 years. But last year, they counted, I think, 500,000 naturally produced Chinook smolts. So they're starting to, the hatchery Chinook are starting to produce offspring as the river begins to settle down and become normal.
Yep.
The winter steelhead population is increased. Before the dams were out, there was about 100 to 200 wild winter steelhead in there. And now there's about 1,300 to 1,700 steelhead.
Yeah.
And the proportion of those that are hatchery it looks to be declining in recent years as the wild population keeps pace and starts to grow. Yeah. So, but the summer steelhead have done it all on their own. There's been no hatchery releases in the Elwha for those fish during this period of time. And there's been, no releases for bull trout. They have tried to help the chum and pink salmon a little bit. Those are struggling to recolonize on their own. And so I guess I look at it and say, it's still an experiment. It's still a laboratory for me. I think I love wild fish, but I understand the social implications for the tribe here. I work closely with them, and I think that it would be unfair of me to ask them to do something that I would not be willing to do if I only had one watershed to fish and hunt in.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. So, how many steelhead do you think returned to the Elwha 200 years ago? Let's just take it back. We're gonna look back 200 years ago, and we're gonna think like how many total wild steelhead do you think actually showed up to the Elwha?
That's a good question. So, and this is a little bit of contention with me actually, because when I started to work with a scientist to estimate how many fish were here, we tended to do this the way that most scientists do, which is you take information that you have, like how many fish we have per, square mile of water or square acreage, just an area by fish number. And then you add up the amount of area you have and how many fish you think you should get. The problem with doing that, of course, is that now our populations are really depressed. So they're not reflective of what could be supported historically. And at that point in time, we didn't have any estimates of how many steelhead might have existed on the OP historically. I had them for the West End, for like the Hoe and the Queets and the Quinault, and I'll hit on that in a second. So in any case, we all compromised. We came up with an estimate that there were about 10 to 15,000 wild steelhead historically in the system, and that seemed really low to me.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, the Elwha is only a 50-mile long river. It doesn't have a bunch of really big tribs, but it's got huge canyons, and we didn't really estimate how many summer steelhead would be there. They were an afterthought. We only focused on the winter runs, and so a little bit of hubris came in, us thinking that that we have a better sense of what to expect. And I'm not saying, it's not true hubris. None of us actually thought that we knew, but, we had just forgotten. They were an afterthought, the summer runs. And so there were probably somewhere between, historically, my estimate now, based on what we see from West End historics, is I would guess there were somewhere between, 15 to 20,000. 25,000 steelhead in the Elwha historically, and my hunch is that half those were probably summer runs. I think the Elwha is likely going to be the most productive summer steelhead stream that we have in all of Western Washington.
Likely, we're in tough shape. I think a lot of people, a lot of sportsmen forget that, the Puget Sound and all that system once had really amazing summer steelhead runs, and along the coast too as well. I'm sure you're aware of all this. And so, it's easy for us to shift that kind of baseline where we forget that, these rivers, they had summer steelhead. And I don't know about you, John, but my favorite kind of steelhead to catch is a summer steelhead.
It can't be beat. I mean, I talk about this, that I love winter runs because you're out there in the, the environment and the climate, but there is nothing like a summer run to be out there in shorts, a warm day to just, crack a beer on a hot day, right? To know that you have such a long period of daylight to fish
Yep.
and the way they fight, right? The
Yeah.
aggression and
Oh, they're
there's no
just a
doubt.
little better to me in a weird way. I would never say anything bad about winter steelhead. You and I both, we love them,
I'm
but
with you.
they're just a little, summer runs are just a little better as a sport fish.
Just a little better. I see a question on here. Somebody asked, what
Yeah,
about the sockeye? Yeah, sockeye. So the sockeye is a good question, and I don't want to mess this up. So Lake Sutherland, like somebody mentioned on here, used to have Lake Sutherland is a lake that's connected to the Elwha River, and
Yeah.
it was above the dam, so it had landlocked sockeye kokanee right in the system, and it still has a bunch of kokanee in there. But what's interesting is that the creek that drains Lake Sutherland, Indian Creek, gets really warm in the summer. Like the mouth of it at the lake outlet is usually running around 73, 74 degrees most of the summer. Really
Yeah.
warm, probably too warm for sockeye to want to go up there and swim through about a mile of really warm water to get there. And there's a big beaver pond there too. The beaver pond doesn't impede access, but it,
Close down
warms the
water.
yeah, that's right, warms things up. And so the sockeye, though, we've seen more sockeye now than we had seen prior. And what's interesting, we're seeing them spawn in the river. And so there are two types of sockeye, life history-wise. There's some that spawn in lakes or creeks
Yes.
or rivers that go to lakes, and they rear in lakes, right? And then you've got
Yeah.
these other kind that spawn in a river, and the juveniles actually rear in the river.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing here. And I can't remember genetically, but I believe the fish that we're finding, the sockeye here, are hodgepodge, but a lot of them I think were coming from northern Vancouver Island and then northern British Columbia. So it's amazing the strain that occurs, right? We're talking that we're seeing sockeye from long distances from us show up here, and Tamam is right. Indian Creek is like a bass pond. It's totally true. I mean, it's warm, and so I'm going to be curious as to whether sockeye are really going to start using that lake again, or whether we're just going to see basically a river spawning type of sockeye, because we're seeing sockeye and they're showing up. And I don't know how many, but 1 year, a couple of years ago, I counted at least 35 when I was snorkeling. So better than the 1 or 2 that we had before.
Yeah, of course. So with all that said, what do you think, when do you think that me and you will get to fish the Elwha in our lifetime? Do you think we'll have a chance to swing a fly on the Elwha, man, for those steelhead?
Man, I do, and I think that's why, and this is one of the things, we removed the dams to rebuild fish so that people can interact with them again, right? That's how we find our connection to nature, is interacting with these fish on the end of our line or snorkeling. But it's usually, there's nothing like a fresh steelhead on the end of your line. And I know the tribe feels the same when they see their first spring chinook of the year and they get to bring that in and have their first fish ceremony. So I do believe that you and I are going to be fishing the Elwha in our lifetime. And for people who aren't aware, the Elwha right now is closed to all fishing. It is closed until 2021, and then they're going to go basically like they're doing now. They're going on, every year and a half or so, they're going to evaluate the populations, and the populations have a number of triggers that they have to meet criteria, right?
Yeah.
And so I just see Emily asked, did they extend the 5-year moratorium? And they did a while back, Emily. Right now, the fishery is closed until 2021. My hunch is that we're still looking at a fishery being 3 to 5 years away, the first fishery to start. And that's just a rough guess, it could be 8 years away. It's like, I don't know, but I would say this is that even though I'm so excited and that we're having this awesome Elwha week about summer steelhead and the resurgence of it, and just the great story of the Elwha, is that we have to be patient. You and I have talked about this, Lee. We don't want to open the river too early, right? It's like, I had a friend, we talked about this, his mom got coronavirus, right? And the woman is a hard-ass worker. She wanted to go back to work right away. But you got to recover, right? And this is part of giving the river a chance to recover and reach its potential, because even though we're seeing lots of fish, the fish aren't, the Chinook aren't all getting upstream as far as we would like them to get, and the coho aren't. So there's a stepping ladder that these fish need to take to continue to access upstream habitat, become really productive, And at that point, I think that you're at a point where you could open a fishery. And, but it's cool right now. I saw somebody just asked, are salmon reaching the upper tribs like steelhead? And the question is, no, they're not. Bull trout were the first fish documented to go way up into the headwaters of the Elwha. And then it was steelhead next. And so right now, the two furthest species that we've seen furthest upstream are steelhead and bull trout. But during the surveys that we did this summer and the surveys that Heidi and Catherine and others have performed in previous years up there, they've seen Chinook up there, and we saw juvenile Chinook up there. So some salmon are making it into those same canyons that the steelhead are in. And I can't recall how far up they've seen coho, but I don't think it's into that canyon where the steelhead were at. So I expect the Chinook to make it up there, right? I mean, that's when I think you're talking about. We're seeing real recovery now. There's a lot of summer Chinook that are staging in these big canyons like steelhead, you know?
It's just classic that the bull trout would be up there first before everything else. It's just like, yep, of course, you know.
No,
it's got to get up there first.
Dude,
especially around here. Something about the bull trout around here. They're up there always.
It's so true. They're like my dog. When I'm walking to the river, they always have to be in front of me.
Yeah.
You know, they can't ever be behind me. And it's like, these bull trout. And it was funny because there was a rock fall at the old dam site right after dam removal that made passage really difficult. And the bull trout were the first fish to make it through there. Nobody thinks of bull trout as being leapers. They're not jumping these cascades. They're going under the bottom. And bull trout have huge pectoral fins, right? Those huge fins at the very front, like a sculpin does. And I think that downforce that they use with their fins pushes them to the bottom, and they just scoot up like little snakes. Yeah, salamanders kind of squeaking through. It's just, and I saw Skagit Slim just ask, we saw some, I mean, there are some big bull trout, and Sam Brinkman has done lots of really good work on this with Heidi and others, but the bull trout were kind of the first clear response that we saw to dam removal. So what we saw was that they started to go to the ocean right away, right? Because they could. And once they went to the ocean, then they got larger. And then they started to diversify in life history. But we've seen some bull trout that are up into that 30-inch range, you know, big 10, 12-pound fish.
Yep. Yeah, we have them here. The Olympic Peninsula has them. You know, we talked about those trout being trapped behind the dam for 100 years.
Yeah.
And does it really surprise you that these steelhead came back, that we're looking at 907 summer, wild summer steelhead? Does it really surprise you, or is it like, given their resilience, you know what I mean? You know that they're resilient. Me and you both know that summer steelhead are really resilient. Is that surprising that they came back in 3 years?
It is, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think, you know, human nature is to, at times, not trust experiences. But in 1980, I was in 1980, I was 10 years old when Mount St. Helens blew. We lived about 40 miles as the crow flies, so the earthquake and everything else hit us, right? And my dad's like, well, Mount St. Helens just blew. And the old man, Harry Truman, who wouldn't leave his cabin, got buried and disintegrated and whatever else. Good for him, brother. Pour one out for Harry. He's up there looking down at the Elwha. The Toutle River got, lambasted by the mountain, and yet in 1986 and 85, 5-6 years later, it had the largest return of winter steelhead in the Lower Columbia. So that was one data point for me. But as a teenager, you're not as focused on that stuff, right? I'm focused on catching fish. And so even though it meant something, I had faith. This is a complete surprise. And I'm going to tell you two reasons why it's a surprise, because the winter steelhead population has not been increasing in size that rapidly, right? Yeah. Like that's not something, like they did go from, a few hundred fish up to 1,100, 1,200 right away with the hatchery, but we're not seeing the same productivity increase in that wild population of winter runs. So that made me think it might take longer. And one of the reasons I thought it might take longer is just that a lot of the steelhead were first colonizers into places, and they don't have salmon nutrients, right? They don't have a bunch of dying salmon to feed their offspring. In any case, so the other thing that really surprised me is that this has largely happened in only 3 years because Glines Canyon Dam was removed in 2014-15, but it wasn't truly passable until like 2016
Yeah.
because of rockfall. So adult summer runs have only been able to get up there for 3 or 4 years, right? And to have that many fish in that short a period is remarkable to me. And I'll give you one reason why is that these are some of the worst ocean conditions that we've experienced on record right now. Like you go to the Skeena. Last year, the Skeena was estimated to have 17,000 wild summer runs. That's it, 17,000. The Columbia had one of its worst runs on record. The snakes down the tube.
Yeah.
The whole coast looked horrible, except for kind of southern Oregon, northern California, which go into a different ocean current. But a lot of the northern North Pacific looked bad. And so this is shocking because just as we're experiencing some of the worst runs we've ever had on the West End VOP, this population shooting through the roof with survival. Yeah. And so that is surprising.
A lot more that made it.
That's right. And that's what I think is that if you're sitting here with, you know, with the number of fish that we're seeing now, how many would you have had in a year when the ocean survival was like it was in the early 2000s? You probably would have had 3 to 4 times as much.
Yeah.
So I'm amazed that these fish have come back this rapidly, and I do think it just hints back when I'm snorkeling the Elwha and seeing all the fish that I'm seeing. There are so many fish underwater in that river compared to places like the Hoh or the Salduck or the Kalau or the Bogey. This place is full of fish, and I think this is another interesting aspect of that laboratory. What happens to fish when you stop killing them and fishing for them for a period of time? We've all been interested in that, right? What if we just shut her down for 5 years? Would they recover? What would happen? You know, it's so
it's an experiment right now. It's just like you're saying, it's a living experiment, man. It's like we're just going to watch this thing and see what happens. And it is amazing to see what's going to happen with no angling pressure. I mean, even with 907 summer runs, I saw a guy right down there, number 5 blue fox. Well, I can tell you from experience that if we all went in there with a number 5 blue fox, we might get almost every single one of them out there. You know, you take guys that know the river well enough and know how to swing a blue fox spinner, they're going to get them, man. And so 907 is not enough for a fishery, but it is amazing. And I mean, I can't thank you guys all enough. Can't thank Rob enough for all the work. I mean, over 15 years the guy has been working on it. I was like 3 years old when he first started working on this dam removal. It's just incredible.
It's
wow. You know,
it's amazing to think that, you know, they come back and they come back that quickly. And somebody just asked, can we continue to, old boy Crazy Legs say, we can continue to blame the blob when populations like the summer runs are doing well. No, and it makes me question that now. I mean, seriously, it's like, is that, you know, are we properly attributing ocean conditions to maybe other things that we've done to the fish? For example, we do know that hatchery fish tend to have simpler life histories. The vast majority of fish in the North Pacific are hatchery. And so with simple life histories and less choices, when ocean conditions get bad, those effects are worse on hatchery fish than they are wild fish. And a great example of that is in the Columbia this year, because this year we had almost as many unclipped fish return to the Columbia as we did clipped. And yet I'm going to guess in the Columbia that they released probably, I think it's like somewhere between 3 to 6, 7 million summer steelhead smolts out of that. Naturally, you're probably lucky to produce 1 million or something, right? And so, it's like there's something about bad ocean conditions. They do have bad effects across the board, but they seem to be especially bad for those fish that have fewer life histories. Yeah.
Well, John, you know, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And
you too, dude.
I just want to thank you so much for coming along, dude. I know you're super busy and everything. And I just really hope that we get together and go fish for summer runs this year. I hope
we're doing it.
Washington closure thing finally, you know, we get to.
I hope so.
I think everybody's just hoping for that right now. We all want to go back to work. We all, you know, want to get back out to fishing. And hopefully we'll be able to get out there, brother.
I'm with you, dude. And, you know, I'm just so hyped to be working with you, man. I think that, you know, and I talk about this all the time. My generation of Generation X did a number of things wrong. Every generation makes mistakes. But I'm looking at your generation, man, and seeing so many of you younger people that really care, have knowledge, and you want to live the life the right way. I'm excited, and I'm going to say that, again, I close out with the most awesome thing about the Elwha is somebody's going to be able to tell their grandkid that you're going to be fishing here in a place that I never caught steelhead in. And
Yeah.
it's not going to be mine because I'm not having them, but I'm doing this for other people's
Yeah.
kids, right?
Absolutely.
These rivers are my children, and I want to give the next generation something to hang on to so that there are other kids that can grow up like you and I do in a rural area where we don't have lots of money, and being outdoors was the cheapest and easiest way to have fun.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I just think that all steelheaders, I mean, that's what we're looking for. That's the dream in our head. We want to go to a river in seclusion. And boy, the Elwha, out of all the places to be secluded, it's like a lot of our coastal rivers that I won't mention around here.
Yeah, yeah.
It is beautiful, man. So everybody who's watching, if you ever get a chance to hike the Elwha, too bad you can't bring a fishing pole for a few years, but if you ever get a chance, you gotta take it because it's breathtaking. It really is. That whole river is.
People should get a chance to see it without the lens of, as an angler, I always look at things differently when I have the rod in my hand, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's good
you
for
look
people
at
to
it
walk
systematically like a robot. Yeah.
Yeah. With the rod in the hand, we're just breaking things down, man. We're like Bill Belichick
exactly.
looking at a play sheet. It's like, where's the fish?
Yeah.
So it is good. People should definitely, and the Elwha right now, there's to get into the Elwha, most of the roads are closed. It's been blown out. So there's really easy hikes that people can take up the river. It's beautiful. People should go visit the Elwha. And I also want to remind people that when we have things that come up, like, when people want to open a fishery or people need protection, the Elwha is one of these places to provide hope. So let's do all we can as a group to ensure that we don't open a fishery too soon, and that when we do open a fishery, that it's well managed, Lee, like in the ways that we think this is such a special place. We've got rivers that are like the Cowlitz, where we're always going to put lots of hatchery fish, and those are our meat and potato rivers. Where you go, you've got other rivers, and on the other extreme, we've got an Elwha.
Yeah.
Which is, for anglers, we've got to learn how to live in balance with these fish if we want them to keep persisting.
We really do. And I think that we can learn a lot from the way other states have managed fisheries. We talked on the phone about the North Umpqua, and I got to visit that fishery, and it's very strict. The guidelines are very strict, but it's saved a beautiful place for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to go there and follow the rules and the guidelines and be able to swing some of those famous runs that so many famous steelheaders before my time going there got to fish it. So it's just one of those things we have to talk about. I really think that anglers need to start considering that there are some places that are going to need to be protected. And that might mean only a swung surface fly or, something like that along those lines. I mean, the North Umpqua was one of those. You can't do anything there. You can't. You got to follow the hardest way to get them, and that's it. And I was happy to just be able to fish it, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah, we'll have to think carefully about this. I mean, the challenge with the Elwha is it's going to be this shining emblem of hope amongst of other watersheds that have been treated as we've traditionally managed things, right? They've been logged, they've been harvested at high levels, and so this is probably going to be one of the only fishable populations of wild summer runs that we have, and summer runs are so aggressive, right? I mean, like you said, I by myself in one summer could probably catch all 1,000 of those fish, using, if I fished it every day, right? It wouldn't all be on a fly, but I'd be using spinners and, a jig. Exactly. So we can be so successful that this is where it behooves us to think about the quality of the experience as much as the numbers of fish. And that's where I'm with you, is that we got to think long and hard and,
what kind of policy do we want? And definitely we have to consider the culture, the Northwest culture.
That's right.
We are particular anglers up here. Our steelhead are interesting. They like to hang out in deep runs and deep pools. They hold differently, and so we've used different methods than a lot of other people do to get them here. And I think that all has to be considered. But like you're saying, the Elwha is a special place, and I think when it comes time to be able to fish it, we're gonna have to consider some drastic changes to what we're used to. That's for sure. So
I think so. And, I know the tribes have thought long and hard. And again, I always want to thank the tribe. Look, they haven't been fishing during this whole period. I mean, how many of us have been willing to shut down our fishery, right, for that long a period of time and go out of? So just kudos to all the folks that have done hard work in this, because, we're getting attention here tonight, and it's really nice because, the reason we do this, we want to raise awareness about success stories where we have, things that make us understand that we're on the right path. And so, man, it's exciting. And thank you to you too, Lee. I'm just so happy to be, to know you as a friend and as a colleague professionally, dude. You're just, you're a completely awesome human being.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just fishing together and everything. I could just tell right away, man, you're just my kind of dude, all the way across the board. So I'm stoked to keep working with you. And before I let you go, I just want to let everybody know that Shane on Friday, I'm doing the same kind of interview, 4:00 p.m. And I'm going to dive into with Shane about, the logistics of bringing a camera up there in one of the harshest, wettest places in the world, and all of that business, all the equipment he used to get in there and film that and making the film. So, and that's on Friday that the actual movie itself comes out, you guys. So if you're worried about that, that's when it's coming out. YouTube and Trout Unlimited and Wild Seals United will give you guys the link to that, and everybody will be able to watch it. But thanks again, John.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to say thanks to all the people that tuned in to support us and learn. And thanks again to all the people that help. And you anglers out there and folks that are interested in this, thank you, because literally it's going to take all of us together to make sure we have other examples like the Elwha, hopefully in the Klamath, right?
Absolutely. That's the next one. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the next one we're after.
We got. They're in the scopes. They're in the sights.
Yeah, they are. Well, it's awesome talking to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Have a good night.
You too, brother. See ya.